BBC podcast. Today we are going to be talking about value and going through some of the thought process of how you market yourself price-wise and think about all the different things you should be considering. For the consultative section today, we're going to be diving into the customer and vendor card a little bit and talking templates, and getting back to the development side of things, we're going to be talking about the strange and wild world of page design. So, stick around. Interesting. I thought I had gotten rid of the crazy swiping sound effect thing there, but continue to evolve the platform. Alrighty, so I got a fun question that I definitely wanted to take on. I've worked in a number of different capacities in the industry, development and consultative and all those different pieces, and I got asked the question of how should I price myself? And that led to a pretty in-depth conversation, and I realized that we don't really talk about that much in our space. There are some really useful utilities when it comes to looking at what the market is willing to pay for employees in the industry. There is something I refer to fairly often for it because they have access to more info than anywhere I would ever be able to go. The Nigel Frank salary survey breaks down different areas of the dynamics family by the different regions and roles. I don't think anyone else has as comprehensive a worldwide reach into all of the different aspects of the industry for figuring out salary. And, that is always a tricky sort of question right now, especially with the fact that more and more people are hiring around the world. And someone who lives in Manhattan has a very different financial need than some of the folks who are enjoying lower cost of living spaces. There's a lot of digital nomads right now that are working remotely in all sorts of places throughout Southeast Asia. Portugal's very popular right now, and a variety of countries are really excited to start to attract some of these digital nomads for that reason. They bring money from out of country and bring it local, so it makes sense. But your financial need doesn't drive your worth, so it gets into that challenging place as an employer of why should I pay for someone who has a higher need if they're remote anyways. So that gets into its own challenge, but that's a bigger industry thing than we're going to be able to cover in this little tiny nook of the world. But we can, however, definitely look at, well, what am I worth? And that can be tricky. The very first thing that I always tell people to do is to take the time to figure out what you need. Yes, understanding what other people charge in the industry is valuable. Like if it turns out you, from a need perspective, need 50 euros an hour, and the market's willing to pay you 100 euros an hour, well, you'd be a fool not to take the 100 euros an hour for sure. Or even maybe meet someone partway and they think they're getting a great deal. So, there is the what is the market willing to pay, but you should know what your floor is. And I think a lot of people who start out as an independent person, who have never worked independently or freelance before, don't know how to calculate their floor. So That's what I wanted to dive into for a little while today. You're going to hear me typing a little bit. I am going to be screen sharing some Excel, but we're going to be talking it all through. So don't worry, if you're listening to audio only, then you will definitely still see, or yeah, exactly. You will still hear all the stuff we're talking about. So the very first place that I go to, which a lot of independent folks don't think through, is you have less time than you think. It is very easy to go, well, I have 40 hours a week. That's my time basis. Mm-mm. If you do the simple math on that, you're going to get a very lovely looking number. So if we look at in an average year, and apologies, I do have a clacky keyboard, so we'll see if one of my to-dos is to go quiet so the microphones don't pick it up. But if we look at the number of weeks per year and we say hours per week is our 40 hours per week, then we get this lovely 52 times 40 equals 2080. That's my basis for how much I need to do my math on, right? Those of you who have freelanced before or just managed an organization or even a department are already going, no, don't ever base on that. Well, let's talk about why. First of all, let's say how many vacation weeks per year you want to have. If you're trying to do this for yourself, you probably want to lean towards the heavier side, and cultures vary. Here in Sweden, for example, it's pretty standard to give 5 weeks per year. Which I know is towards the deeper end of the pool. In U.S. companies, I've seen it as low as 2. I'm going to just arbitrarily pick 4 for some basis to call it. But you also then go, okay, well, that's easy enough. 4 that just reduces a little. No, you're not done yet. If you're working for yourself, there are also holiday seasons, and typically, on average, you'll probably find anywhere from about 5 to 15 holidays days per year. You don't want to be factoring and working on Christmas if you celebrate Christmas. There are plenty of other holidays for lots of other faiths. We just had one last week for the name eludes me. There are a variety of faiths that have a variety of holidays. There are also cultural holidays. You got to factor all that in. I'm going to call it 10 for the purposes of our math. So for our weeks per year, we're losing another 2. Okay, yeah, that happens. And unless you're the most amazing healthy person on the planet and you've never caught a cold in your life, you're gonna need to also factor in you don't get to pay yourself when you're sick. So you got to factor in sick weeks per year as well. Well, and also if you're if you are currently blessed with small children, or that's on your near future, don't forget to factor in the fact that you, having a small child in your house, have a beachhead for every disease that goes around. They have a very underdeveloped immune system. They catch everything. It grows nice and strong in them, and you're bombarded with every part of it. So if you have children, double this number until they're about 10, realistically. It's just something to be aware of. I'm going to just put in sick weeks per year. We'll just do 2. So we've now got vacation at 4, holiday for 2, sick for 2. You are also going to, as an independent person, need to do accounting work on a regular basis that maybe you're going to be super efficient at. And you don't need to meet with an auditor. You know how to do all the filings and all that sort of stuff, and it'll only take you an hour. That's lovely. I envy you. I've done this a lot of times in a lot of different parts of the world. I've run U.S. shops. I've had U.S. employees. I have Swedish shop. I have Swedish and Danish employees. There's no amount of efficiency that's getting some of these things down to the level that they should be. And even just meeting with an accountant to review everything, you're going to lose some time. I usually treat this in the aspect of approximately a day out of each month you'll lose to some of the administrative work of doing all of your filings. Well, we already dropped out 8 weeks, so that's 2 months are gone. So I'll use a basis of, we're going to have accounting overhead for weeks per year. We're going to have another 2 weeks disappear because that's 10 more working days, just poof, gone. If you are being smart about how you're operating in the space, you probably also want to do cool stuff like attend conferences. Even if they're virtual conferences, you're probably going to want to go to those. If you're lucky enough to afford, because you should be budgeting for this, if you're lucky enough to afford to go to some of the conferences in your region or even outside of your region, it's very easy to lose a week or two to conference seasons because you are going to potentially need to do stuff. So there goes another two. Okay. Are we done? I think that's a pretty good basis of things to be thinking about on all the different parts that you're going to lose. So now, if we think about this, this is about 12 weeks all told that are just eaten. So total actual weeks per year is going to in fact be our 52 minus the sum of all of these previous ones, which brings us up to, now we're at 38 weeks per year. Well, 38 weeks per year is a whole different ballgame of hours per week, right? So let's look at hours per week on 38, which it's too early in my morning. I'm not going to do any math. I'm going to trust the Excel doc. So now we're down to already 1,500, roughly, 1,520 to be exact for people who love exact. So we're down to about 1,500 hours. Now that's already, we've lost a quarter of the year to just stuff. That's an entire quarter just gone. Just going through this exercise was a huge eye-opener for a couple of the people I've talked to about how do you budget your time and do your value basis, because they think of the 40-hour work week. Well, I have some bad news for you who are already starting to do the math in your head on 1,500. This also runs under the basis that on your work days, you sit down at, say, 8 a.m., and you work 8 hours. All billable. I don't know how many of you have had the luxury of having that happen 2 or even 3 days in a row as a freelancer or in an organization where you work uninterrupted 8 hours, just straight billable, day after day. And imagine trying to do that over the course of an entire year. It's not going to happen. If you are lucky and you're doing work with one big partner or one big customer or that sort of thing where you don't have to do sales efforts, it's relatively easy billing because you just send them one monthly invoice. If you're lucky, then you also get to charge for the times you spend in meetings with those people. That would be pretty cool. Some of those partners, that is the case. And if you're lucky, you've got that big fat contract with one big partner or one big end user, whatever have you, and you also don't have to do sales and marketing efforts. Well, good on you. That's pretty great. Just as a side note, that's extremely dangerous. If they don't like you, if they get mad at you, then they withhold your payments. If you have only one big giant customer, you're gonna be in a world of hurt at some point if things just don't go perfect. I have definitely, as an independent, worked with organizations where they consumed my entire working capacity, and I've had that turn into legal battles, and it was very expensive, and it hurt. You potentially need to have a huge cushion to be able to absorb the rainy day when you're working with one big partner or one big end user. So be aware that if you have the luxury of just having that great one customer, you need to be saving for if something goes wrong with that project, so that you have a cushion of 1 to 3 months to potentially find a replacement for them, and a cushion that if you need an attorney, you can pay for one. I have, in my early days, for sure, been in places where I didn't have the cushion to pay for the attorney to go after the money they owed me, because the money they owed me was the cushion that I needed to pay for the attorney. And I have also been in cases where I have won court cases against people that owed me money, and they just bankrupted the company, and I was given pennies on the dollar, as it were, and all of that just disappeared. So when you are freelance, you have to plan for if something with my best relationship goes wrong, what is my timeline on being able to survive without that? So bringing this back around to the math basis, if we're looking at that wonderful perfect world scenario, you get to bill for all that odds and ends, you have a utilization rate that is a lovely probably 80, maybe even 90%. We'll call it 80%. So out of a given 8-hour workday, most of your time is billable. You only lose a little bit of time here and there to email nonsense, something like that. So we'll call that the high utilization figure. And if you are working with multiple organizations, you do your own sales efforts where you're blogging, you're marketing yourself, you're doing all these different meetings. I have been bitten in the butt by, estimating what something would take me in development hours, and then I spent more time after the development efforts validating that there were no bugs in my code than the time I spent doing the development work. So say it was 40 hours of development work, I have had projects that I have then spent after the contract was over more than 40 hours with them calling me to say, we found a bug in this. Meeting, go through it. It wasn't a bug. It was something that they were complaining about that they didn't understand, that they didn't read the documentation that I gave them, that the recordings that we made of how to use it. I spent much more time on that. So my actual on that project was ghastly low. It is way too easy as an independent person to think these are the hours it will take. Yeah, but there's so much stuff around it. So if we want to be sensitive to those exact sort of scenarios, well, guess what? Your utilization hours in that scenario is actually about 50%. So we've now got a couple of utilization high-lows. So if we call it high hours per week out of that 1520, then we get 80% of 1520 is a little over 1200. If we have low hours per week, we then are much delightfully looking at 50% of that. That's only 760. Imagine if you tried to build your budget on 2,000 hours and then your effective billable rate was way down near 800. Oh, you'd be getting 3 or 4 months into doing operations going, why can't I make ends meet? This seems like it should have been enough. I priced myself right, I thought. This is why. If you're losing time to, I want to spend an hour here and there just, reading about what's new in Business Central. I want to spend, 45 minutes listening to a podcast about Business Central. Hey, if these are things that you want to do that you can't charge for that time and you don't want it to eat into your personal time because it's professional development, well, guess what? That utilization low of 50% isn't that bonkers of a number. And you also, and this is a whole separate thing we'll go into in another session maybe, you also can't plan these sort of things. I worked for a number of partners who were like, our resources, as we're planning out their utilization rates and planning their projects and all the things that they need to do, we'll aim for about 75% billable, and we'll fill their schedule about 75%. Cool. Let me know how that goes when you get your first support case and they don't want to work on it. Because support cases, could take 4-8 hours. Suddenly, all of that non-billable time that you had left open in their project schedule, poof, it's gone for the whole week. So, yeah, there's some dark arts and science to trying to even figure out what should you be scheduling to have happen in a given week. And when you start looking at these numbers, you go, wow. And all right, let's see. We've already burned about 20 minutes, so we'll see how much we get to in the second half. So there are some other odds and ends that you should be factoring in. There are expenses. Every 3 years, you should be thinking about a computer. You probably should be thinking about business phone. If you're smart, you are in a place where the tax implications, you should be running it as a business, not as a sole proprietor. You should be able to, depending on your local laws, deduct a lot of things. That includes, for example, conference fees and travel, if it's travel for yourself rather than travel for the customer. If you are working indie for the first time, you should be looking at business insurance. Why is business insurance a good thing? Well, there are lots of insurance companies that provide riders for things like if you're working out of your house and some dingbat manages to crash a car through your wall and you can't work for 2 weeks, well, guess what? A lot of insurances will actually provide for replacement wages. I can't work for 2 weeks. Well, okay. Any number of things that are completely beyond your control, insurances can help you with those. It varies by what's available in your region, but those are all different things. So on the computer front, I'm going to do the math for the rest of this section in euros, just because it's pretty close to parity to dollars. So that's kind of one of the wider reaches. Obviously, I'm in Sweden. That's in crowns. We have about a 10-to-1 ratio for euros, so it's kind of easy to do the math on things. So if you figure you're going to potentially need maybe a desktop, maybe a laptop as well, because you should be able to be mobile, but you know that on a regular basis you're working with things. You can, on the computer front, you can figure you're going to spend maybe a couple €1,000 on a desktop, a couple €1,000 on a laptop, and they'll age out every 3 years roughly. So that's €4,000 divided by 3 across the 3 years, and you want to break that mentally budget wise into what's your monthly, because we're going to do all these numbers on a monthly basis. So 4,000 divided by 3 divided by 12, that's your monthly euro allocation towards that hardware. So that's about €110. You might spend €50 a month on a phone. I don't know. Same sort of thing on the conference fees. Maybe you're going to budget €1,500 for different conferences throughout a year. For travel, you're going to budget a couple €1,000 throughout the year. Your insurance, maybe it's 50 per year. And I'm just punching all these numbers in, doing divided by 12. So there's any number of other expenses you can factor into this. You might, for example, really think smart about have accounting services help you. Call that, €1,500 for the year or something like that. Pulling numbers out of nowhere. I have accounting people that I pay separately, so it's a whole different thing. Accounting figures per year, you probably should have an attorney on retainer, even if you don't make much use of them. Just if a partner gives you a contract, you probably shouldn't be reading that just by your lonesome. So figure that maybe on the cheap side, you don't make much use of them. Call it 1,000 hours per year for an attorney. Again, dividing all these by 12 on screen just to get some figures on here. There's bits and pieces. There's lots of other expenses you can be putting into this, but let's call that good enough for now. And so we're looking at your monthly expense just for some pretty basic, minimal list of things. We're looking at about €600 to €700 per month to be factored into things. Okay. Now we've got a basis for what do we look at for some basic expense. All right, and that doesn't include things like books or training or any number of other very smart things you should be spending on. Well, now we get into 25 minutes into the episode. We're finally getting to okay, so what do you charge for a price? Well, that depends. So what I often will recommend people do is start with your gross need. So in your bank account as an individual, what do you need to have in your bank account every month to make your bills? just start with that number. And this will be a monthly figure where we're working all monthly. Just adding that as a notation there, gross need monthly. So, okay, so let's say, for example, I'm just going to pick a whole number here, 5,000 euros a month. That's your gross need annual. Looks at 5,000 times 12, which obviously 60,000. That's cool. Okay, well, actually, I'm saying gross need, but that's actually net need. So you need... My bad. I apologize. Call that early in the morning brain power. So you need to have, as a result of all of your things, 5,000 euros a month, or that's your objective. I am not going into in this episode, hey, how much of that are you putting aside for a rainy day? How much are you putting into retirement because you're working for yourself? All those fun things. Those are whole separate life planning questions that you should have a financial advisor, which is an additional monthly expense. So say you need 5,000 euros a month. Don't forget that we also have the expenses per month that we calculated up, and we'll grab that from our other spreadsheet into here. That worked well. Grabbing our expenses. There we go. So our actual monthly need there already is a little bit higher. But here's the thing. Most countries also have various forms of taxation, and you're going to need to know your local tax laws in a big way. In the U.S., for example, you have your income tax for the federal. You might have state income taxes. You also have your own Social Security contributions. But in the U.S., you're also potentially going to need to pay self-employment tax, or if you've incorporated your business, you're going to need to pay your corporate tax. Those all add up. The tax rates sound nice and low, and all these expenses do get deducted from your tax burden, but there are still limits. And the same is true in Sweden. We've got, corporate tax on companies. We, as owners of a company, you're often still employers, and you have to pay your employer contribution on all your salaries, plus your personal input, all that sort of thing. It varies wildly. I mean, it could be, you can potentially with really good accounting guys, maybe get your tax in the U.S. down to 20%. And in other parts, depending on how big your numbers get, you could easily find yourself in heavy tax countries, like the Scandinavia ones, where we do have the net tax can be higher when you're paying all the parts of it. You could see it maybe all the way up to 50. I'm going to arbitrarily pick about 40% taxes. So we have to think about the tax burden monthly as well, which means that we need to take that number, that 5,000, and we have to go, well, we need and apologies, this is early morning math brain, we need to take that 5,000 number and we need to go, okay, well, I need 40% more than that to really make sure that I'm getting my revenue. So probably about 7,000. I might even pad this up because who knows what other odds and ends are going to come along. So let's pad that up a little bit and call it 7,500. So that's actually our gross monthly is now 7,500. Okay, well that's cool. So we've got our gross monthly, and now we also have our gross annual number, which is just the 7,500 times the 12. So now we've got 90,000 euros as our gross annual need. Okay, so already you can see we've gone the other way that we did with our hours. I need 60,000. Well, then you need to be making 90,000. Okay, and based on our hours before, I need to be making 90,000 in 760 hours, not making 60,000 in 2080. So I will often see people do the wrong thing where they take I need the 60,000 with no expenses factored in, and I need that to be based on my 2080, which I just did my Excel formula in completely the wrong way. So I need my 60,000 divided by the number of hours. So I only need to charge 30 euros an hour. That's my need. Wow, I can charge 50 euros an hour and I'll be making bank. So if we realistic think this one and we say, okay, well, then what we need is probably about 90,000 and we need to pull that off in 750 hours. Well, goodness grief, my Excel is not cooperating with me today. If you're seeing the video on this, you'd be laughing at me. It took took only the hours. So if we take our 90,000 and we divide it by the 760, there we go. We see that it actually, requirement-wise, is 120 euros an hour. So imagine if you had gone, I'm going to be a freelancer, and I did the math, and maybe just for safety's sake, I'm going to say I need about 50 or 60 euros an hour. By the time you get into your second or third month, you're going to start going, why am I not feeling my budget? Something is not right. Well, 118.42 euros per month is a world of difference. Oh, geez Louise. Okay, yeah, if anyone following the video has just gone, dude, you just did a big mistake in your math here. You did your annual divided by hours. Did I? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's annual hours, annual amount. Whew. Okay. Whew. Sorry. Panic there on my Excel driving. So you can see real quick that, how you do your math basis and how you think about how you value yourself is a real big difference. And if you're lucky enough to, instead of having those low figures, which is what I just did the basis on, if you instead take that high utilization rate where you're managing to get more towards the 80 hours mark, you can take that 90,000 figure and divide it by your 1,200, and you can see that 74 euros an hour is a safe-ish number. So that gives you a sort of a better sense of what do you got to think about when you price yourself up. And you do need to be smart about this. I did say, for example, it really is a smart idea to build your rainy day funds for yourself, for your organization, if you're multiple people. And if you've got multiple people, you're going to need to do this math for when you hire somebody to work with you. What is your benefit of working with them? What is their actual cost? And these are some of the things you have to think through in a similar process. The taxes are going to be very different with employees because you, as an employer, pay a percentage, but they pay some of that percentage too. So the tax rates are different. But yeah, so I hope this helps people think through, what should I be charging? Your numbers are going to vary wildly by what your financial needs are, what your local expenses are. You're going to have to assess what basis do you really want to have your annual figures on. Are you leaning towards the happy rosy picture of 1,400 hours, or are you wanting to safety sanity check yourself down in the 700 or 800 hours? You got to think these things through and decide what makes sense for you. Yeah, so with any luck, that was a useful half hour. Food for thought for some people. This obviously applies to anyone trying to price themselves up. Nothing about this is BC specific. This is just straight, how do I value my hours? So if you have friends who are graphic designers, web builders, any number of things where they charge clients by the hour, if they've been struggling or they talk about not being able to figure out how they should value themselves, point them at this. Nothing about this was BC specific. So, alrighty. Well, speaking of BC specific, let's see if we can fit some content about BC into the next half hour, since I went on for a good long while there. Alrighty, we are going to talk today about the customer card. So let's hop on over to our Business Central environment. Don't worry, I am trying to pay a very close attention to making this audio friendly, which I do have some experience with. I grew up with a good friend of mine throughout my youth that was blind, so we got used to working together. All right. So let's talk a little bit about customers and in tangent on that, a little bit about vendors. We'll see what we can cover in a good 15 minutes or so. The customer card has all sorts of settings on it, and some of them are brilliantly obvious, some of them are just info pieces. As we've talked about in the past, we've got fast tabs, and every single fast tab on the customer card, I believe, has a show more, just about. Yep. So there are tons and tons of pieces of info about a given customer that you will want to see. Right up the minute you open it, one of the first things you see these days is a lot of balance and sales information. And you will see fast tabs for some of the basics like address and contact. You'll see fast tabs for invoicing that has lots of information about how you are going to invoice them. You also have a section about payments, which has to do with them paying you, not how you pay them. We had a fun Twitter discussion about the wonderful world of payments. There's a fast tab for some shipping, and there's also a fast tab these days for statistics, which is pretty nice. So if we go into the general section and we show more, we'll see lots of info about like credit limits that we can do. We can assign which salesperson. We can do some different controls on that. Address has all the things that you would expect it to right out of the gate, with address and phone number, email, all that sort of thing. It has connections to the built-in Business Central CRM system in this fast tab as well, which is a whole little separate tour of its own. The invoicing tab has useful info if you're doing business with new customers. This is what I'm looking at in front of me is a worldwide one copy of the database, so it is not localized to any particular regions. So for example, when we look at the vendor card, we won't have the 1099 fields that the US version would have, and I believe the US version has a different field in place of a VAT registration number, I believe, but not real sure. Anyways, in the invoicing, we also have the connections to the posting groups. General business posting groups help your system know how to connect when I make revenue from this customer by selling to them, which GL accounts should that sales information hit. The customer posting group hits which accounts receivables should the revenue then be due against. Because you might, for example, have customers that are solid, they're contract, you don't have to worry about it, so you have an accounts receivable that is your for sure. Or you might have customers that are a little more questionable, like it's a struggle to get revenue from them, you have to do a lot of collections efforts, and you want to separate that out on your chart of accounts as accounts receivable questionable, which is a common practice if you deal with hit or miss customers. You would set different posting groups for those customers that you're not sure exactly the timing you are going to collect on them. So that's the super summary version of posting groups. You can also do show more on invoicing and change the currency code you deal with them in. You can also adjust a variety of different VAT elements. And the payments fast tab, initially there is only a payment terms. This lets you set up and configure for your organization all the different payment terms. For example, common thing to do is net 30. You can also do due in the current month. I've seen plenty of people who will do due by the end of next month. There are lots of different ways you can configure the due date calculations for the payment terms, but that's where it comes from. If you do show more on payments, you can also require prepayments. You can also have default methods by which they pay you by. So when you write up an order, do they always pay via credit card? And you're going to see that revenue come in a different way. Okay. Lots of stuff like that. The shipping information lets you choose some of the different pieces that you might do if you or your customer is multi-location. So if you're an organization where you've got a warehouse in one region and a warehouse in another region, you can pre-default anytime you're doing business with customers in region 2, for example, that you always want to ship from your region 2 warehouse, and you can have that default from here. If they're a customer that has multiple locations, you can set up ship tos, which we'll chat in a minute, but you can define here are your default ship to for this customer. You can also decide settings like shipping advice. Do you and this one is if you're new to BC and new to ERP, that can trip you up. Shipping advice just means, are we allowed to ship partially or only complete whole orders? That's all. So shipping advice by default is, I believe, partial, but you can say complete to prevent the system from saying, all right, we can only ship them parts. You can also control some different things around which shipping agents. There are plenty of customers that maybe they have their own preferred trucking companies or something like that. You can control that there. So there's lots of bits and pieces under the customer card just by itself. And then if we look at the related action under customer in here, and this is another place in the system where the action bar could use a little love, because the action bar here, we've got customer as a group of things right in the action bar itself, and then under related we also have customer. So sometimes describing these to people is a little bit of a challenge. We can, for a given customer here under this related info, we can set dimensions. That's its own episode we'll dive into. We can set up bank accounts, so that way we know which bank accounts the customer is paying from, or if we need to remit a refund to them, how do we want to do that? This is typically required or needed for the electronic transfer type stuff. Direct debit mandates, that's a whole different thing. That gets into electronic banking, and that's super regionalized. Ship to addresses, you can set all the different locations they might want you to ship to. Contact, that connects you into the CRM side of things. We also can set up item references. So if the customer you're dealing with gives you an order and they only do it with their part numbers for your stock, well, this is where you can put that mapping together for this customer. So that way your salespeople can easily take that order, maybe an Excel file or a PDF, or God help you if you're working with faxes, then you can punch in their item numbers and move right along. And then there's some alternate different pieces that get elaborate comments that you can track some info about them. Approvals, which is its whole thing. We've got attachments that you can, attach like signed agreements with customers and store those in here. It's a nice to have, but often there's more logical storage components. And document layouts, you can give people different formats for invoices, credit memos, all sorts of stuff. So that kind of is in a general sort of overview some of the info about customers. There are lots and lots of other pieces for customers that you can be doing with things. You can do invoice discounts, you can set special prices, you can set special line discounts, which can include all sorts of fun stuff like sales campaigns or quantity breaks. And there are also different things you can do around creating prepayment handling, lots and lots of stuff around customers. And if we look at vendors real quick, we'll see it's a very similar structure to the card. It's a little more simplified, but same general idea. If we look under the related vendor, we'll see dimensions, bank account, contact, order addresses is kind of akin to ship to, then comments, approvals, again, item references, document layouts, and attachments. So same sort of idea, and we also have the ability to set what items does this vendor have for us, what are some of the discounts they'll give us, what are their prices, all that fun stuff. There's lots and lots more to cover about all those. All right. Well, that was a 15-minute or less whirlwind tour of just what is on a customer card. A quick little extra thing, because it is super handy and super relevant, and a lot of people new to the system are not aware of it. If we create a new customer, it actually has the ability, and this is configured by default in Cronus companies, but it will not be configured if you create a new empty company or you're working with maybe an upgraded one. You can have templates for different customers. In my case, say I'm going to pick a EU customer. Where is this coming from? We've got, under the Actions menu, there is a Function section, and in here there is Templates, Apply a Template, and Save as a Template, which are all around the templating idea. If we look at the template list, we will see that's where this list of templates comes from when I create a new one. If we click on the Assist Edit next to the code for that, we can do the Edit function, and you'll see you get a card that looks like a simplified version of the customer card. This lets you set up a whole bunch of info to pre-fill for all of your different customers when they're created. So if you're creating things all the time, templates are definitely your friend. And you can, for example, if you're working with a large organization that has 1,000 locations and your team is chugging along making all those, you can make the first one and then come under the action function to save as a template. If you are in you may have noticed, if you're in an organization where people are creating customers left and right, and you oops-a-daisy, you made 2 different customers in your system that are the same, or companies merge, under that functions, we also have that little merge with. So I thought I would mention it since it was on screen. It's a pretty handy function where you can merge 2 different customer records together, and it'll let you know what all is going to happen around that. So that's fun. Okay, cool. Well, that's at least some basics around customers. Right. Using up our last 15 minutes or so of today's session, a little on the development side of things. Let's talk about the wacky world of pages. So coming back into our Visual Studio Code environment, we talked last time we were diving into development side of things. We were talking about tables and how records work, and we kind of explained a little bit around that we're running some code in a code unit that was working with record variables and all that fun stuff. Okay, well that's cool, but how do we make a table, make a page rather? Well, pages are an interesting thing, and I think a lot of us in our space take pages for granted around some of the weird behaviors that we have in pages, and it trips up new people, and we're at the point where we don't even see it. So if I were to make just a random new table that has a primary key of code and a description, and we made that a text, this is an extension that sample table. For those who are seeing my screen, I'd use the new table wizard, which is coming from one of the Visual Studio Code extensions. I believe this one's the AZAL Dev Toolbox. Yeah, AZAL Dev Tools. That lets me just type in a grid of fields, and then I can make some, value decimal. I can make a grid of all the different field names, their IDs, their settings. Cool, so now I've got real simple, real quick, a table called sample text, and I've got a code field, a description, a value, some sort of silly stuff like that. We do have to define a primary key. That's its own thing. So now we've got a sample table, but we don't have anywhere in the system that the user could go see this because we don't have a page for it. Well, let's make a page. I'm going to do it from scratch rather than using any wizards. So we'll call this sample table, sample text page.al. Sure. There are all sorts of discussions and best practices around how you should structure your extension folders and how you should name your objects, and thus how you should name your files. So we'll have a chat about that probably next episode, because I think that's a good thing to cover early. Okay, so a page object, just like everything else in AL, there are lots of snippets for it. So for example, as I start typing page into this blank AL file, I get the IntelliSense popping up saying, okay, well, here's a page type. We could do page customization, page extension. That's cool. If I, instead of typing page, type tpage, I'm going to get all of the snippets from the AL language extension, and because I have Waldo's Visual Studio Code extension installed, I also get some of the different snippets from Waldo that if your IntelliSense pops open and you just see the list of all of the different snippets, but you don't see the content of that snippet, on the right hand side when you mouse over the row you have selected, there's a read more, and you can preview what the snippet will look like. So if I typed tpage and did down arrow, I will see that it notes that it is a page of type list, and on the read more section I can see it will make a new page with an ID, a page name, and it's going to give us some properties and some basic layout, some basic actions, all that stuff. So I will make use of this snippet. Sounds cool. If we delete the ID and hit Control Space, if you've got the AL language will grab the next available object number in your range, but if you also have AL Object ID Ninja, you'll get that little pop-up we had in the right, because we can potentially share our object numbering info with other people we're developing with to make sure we don't both make 5100. So and that's its own delightful episode. So we'll call this sample text list, and we got to put quotes around it, so we'll put some quotes around the name here. There we go. We'll definitely have best practices talking about object naming. Okay, so now looking at the anatomy of this page object that we're going to be seeing here, we on our first line have what is the object type, what is the object number, and what is the object name. That is your basic AL structure. You'll notice too that this is a funky little markup language. It's not JSON. It's it is using our curly braces for sure, but it's also not exactly a programming language. It is a kind of markup language, and I'll talk about why I'm noting that. So if we look in the curly braces, the very first thing we get is a list of some properties. These properties are different assignments. So for example, in the snippet, because we had taken the list type, it created line 3 as page type equals list with a semicolon at the end, because this is a semicolon ending markup language. If we mouse over any of these different properties, we will see some of the info from help. So we see that page type is an option. It can be a card, a list, a role center, blah, blah, blah. We can click on Get Help, and it will drop us to the Business Central help page for the page type property. All of these little options here, these are properties of the page. And it knows that based on the fact that these are lines at this first level directly under the page. We have some required things like what type it is. We have application area and usage category, which are worth their own discussion. But where are we getting the information? Pages are meant to display info from a table. So the source table is equal to, and we see that the snippet automatically filled in table name. Source table equals table name. Well, table name isn't valid, so it gets a red underline on that. If we just do delete that and do double quotes and then control space, we normally get some IntelliSense that tells us a little bit about what our options are. I stand corrected, no double quotes. If we do control space here and we start to type the name of our object, sample text, we get an IntelliSense drop-down list of all the tables that it knows about. If you don't get this list, it means that your system has not downloaded symbols correctly. So, a heads up. Okay, and we've got an additional section under the page object that defines a layout section. If we collapse the layout section, we'll also see that we have a section for actions. So this describes to Business Central what we want to appear. You'll notice that this is not a WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get page designer, because we are just generally given some rules of how to describe to Business Central how it should render information. The reason for that is because, yes, we could potentially preview what it looks like in the web client, but guess what? There's also a tablet client. There's also a mobile client. This page type could be API, and then there is no UI. So we have the responsibility to describe to Business Central what it should do with things. And it helps to understand that, because you might get the question of, well, can I drag this around in the order of things? No, you are utilizing syntax to describe the sequence of things. So in our layout, we're giving a whole bunch of descriptive information. And we're saying that within the area section of the layout called content, and there's lots more pieces of this. If you look into the page type, there are specific areas. If we delete content and we have just area open parentheses, close parentheses, and do control space, we'll see that we get the option to do, are we doing stuff that's going to be in the content or stuff that's in the fact boxes? So we're doing stuff in the content. And then within that area, what do we want to put in here? If we, after the curly brace, do control space, we can see we can do some properties to the area. But these are then the valid different parts that we can put onto that content area. We can put charts, we can put fields directly on the content area. We can also put groups, which is what the fast tabs are. If you're doing role centers, you can do queue groups. We're doing a list, so we're doing a repeater part. We can also do a part, which is how you bring in other pages onto one page. So for example, the sales order is a card, kind of a card type called a document, where we have parts that are fast tabs up top, and then we have a repeater for the lines. So our template gave us a repeater, and then we need to give that repeater a name. And then within the repeater, we define the columns by marking up the field keyword. One of the things that I've seen trip up newer people working with things is when we're defining a field and we say field open parentheses, the IntelliSense will show us that our tooltip, the tooltip will show us that field takes two components. It takes a name, semicolon, and then an expression. The name here means almost like a variable. It's actually the name of this field control. So that if we need to do programming against this particular displayed field, this is the name that we would use for it. Then the expression is where does it get the content of that field that it is displaying to the user. It is very common for the field name to be the same name as the content that we're getting. So, for example, on our sample table, we had a description. We had a field called description. So it would be very common to have this field called description, and then a semicolon, and we do rec.description because we want to get the description expression field from our current record of whatever is being displayed in this repeater. Then we do curly braces for that field object, and we set some properties on the field object. If we do control space, we'll see lots of different options in here. There are many options for field properties. So, for example, application area is still currently required. It's just one of those things of if you don't know what to do with application area, then you need to include it, but set it to equals all. So, why I'm differentiating that this is a little bit of a markup language is because things get really weird, and I'm going to go a few minutes over today to explain that one, what I mean by that. We'll do a separate section talking about fact boxes and actions on a page. So if you're wondering how that all works, don't worry, we're going to cover that, but that's going to be a separate episode, I think. So one of the things that I've seen confuse people is this markup language that we're using to display things on a page has different rules than when we're programming code for this system. You'll notice that we have property assignments that just are using the equals. So application area equals all semicolon. That's pretty close to the programming language rules that AL uses, but it's not the same. If we wanted to see an example of what I mean by that, let's say we were going to want to have something special happen on description, that whenever a user punches in a value into our sample text description, during the validation process, we should do some extra logic on that. So to do that, on this field on the page, we would do a trigger inside of the field as a property, and we have a list of potential trigger events. The triggering and eventing system, I think, is going to be next episode because we need to understand that to move forward with the platform. But here we've got, for triggers on a field, we have on after lookup, on after assist edit, on after drill down are three common ones depending on what type of field it is. On control add-in is a whole different ball of wax dealing with control add-ins, and that's its own thing. On lookup lets you do some special controls around how you want to pop open info, but what we're looking for is the last one, on validate. So we do this trigger on validate, open and close parentheses here, and you'll find it very frustrating as a new person. You would think that the next thing you would do under this trigger is do a curly brace, just like all those other things where we did area, curly brace, repeater, curly brace, field, curly brace, trigger, curly brace. Nope, curly braces don't work. You'll get a whole bunch of error messages here saying syntax problem, begin expected, end expected, blah, 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 blah. Whew. Whole bunch of stuff goes crazy because triggers are using the AL language, not the page markup language. So we have to use begin ends. Curly braces are no longer our friend. Inside of triggers, we're programming, not doing the markup. And so we have to use a whole separate rule about that. I actually have an article on the Spare Brain website about this. That talks about the challenge of this one. I refer to it as Dr. Al and Mr. Cal because it's bizarre to go from this markup language to a programming language. They effectively work in two different ways. So if I say, for example, I'm going to do something bonkers that whatever the user types, we're going to replace that with some other text. We're making a trolley sort of extension, I guess, today. So whenever they validate it, if, say, the user ID equals admin, and I'm just hard coding because I'm just trying to go quick here, then begin, end, I'm just using an extra begin, end. Normally we wouldn't do this for a single thing. And then we want rec.description to equal lol admin. And there we go. So anytime the user is admin and they're punching in a description onto this page, we're going to replace it with lol admin. Well, syntactically, this whole chunk of code is a different beast. We've got trigger, begin, we do an if statement, and we're doing a comparative equals inside of this if statement. So we're saying if the user ID equals admin, then, and if we want to do a sequence of different actions as a result of this if being true, we don't do a curly brace. We have to use the keyword then. So for those of you coming from other programming languages, you might do if condition and then just do a curly brace. Stuff happens. We don't do that, even though the markup language might make you think it works that way. Nope. We're having to work the old school pseudo Pascal way. So if conditions, then, and now a syntactical grouping pair, begin, end. And we'll also notice that in the properties we did application and we did straight equals all. But down here in the code world, where we're operating under the old Pascal style language, when we set the description field to a value, we must use the colon equals assignment value, because it will interpret rec.description equals quotes blah blah blah. That's a comparative equals, so that will not work. So it throws people off a great deal, and I thought it worthy of its own little episode very early in the beginning here, that when we're dealing with reports, we're dealing with pages, and we're dealing with queries, there are many times where we're doing syntactical markup language which operates under completely different mechanistic rules than when we're doing code type situations like we did in our previous development section, where we had triggers, we had begin ends, we have almost no markup in a code unit because there's nothing that we're describing to the system about what it should be doing. We are giving it code to act on. So that messes up a lot of people who are new to developing with this system. It is two programming languages in a trench coat. So that's fun. And if you want to completely bend your brain, do be aware that you are being given two programming languages in a trench coat, which are standing on top of the shoulder of C#, that this gets compiled to on the platform side, which gets, it's transpiled into C# on the platform side, rendered to the UI using a whole bunch of TypeScript, and the calls to the SQL backend are done via SQL calls that are doing lots and lots of unions. So for our perspective, we interact with the two kids in the trench coat, but they're standing on about 5 other kids. So there's a remarkable amount of programming languages involved in the platform of this whole thing. Yeah. Okay. All right, so just for those of you who are looking at some of the visible elements of this, I'm going to go ahead and publish this tiny little, we just added a new table, a new page. I'm just going to publish it for the laughs, for those who are watching along, to actually see that it does what it should be doing, to see how this markup language renders. It should just be a list page we can search on, and we actually will not be able to find it, I believe. Let's see here. If we log back in, because of course, Business Central Dockers log you out automatically after about 20 minutes, and we definitely took longer than that. Come on. I believe this won't be available in our search. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, cool. So here's our sample text list, and we see we get a repeater that has a column for code and a column for description. And we can edit this list, and we can go hello as our code, and whatever we punch in as description, I am super. Because of that code, it should alter that. Okay. In our code here, we did really lazy fast coding where we said if user ID equals admin. Well, I believe the official name of this account is admin uppercase. So our trolled ourselves. we're uppercase admin, not lowercase admin. So yeah, that's fine. Okay, but that showed at least, how it shows up as a description. There are lots of many other pieces to page design, but I wanted to cover a quick talk to the concept of doing the markup for layout, for code, for triggers and events and all that sort of stuff. Okay, well, we went a little bit over, but we went over a lot of things too. So I hope the first half of this, the first half hour or so, thinking through all of the different expenses, the way you need to market yourself, the time that you're going to be spending on producing product. Think about all those different pieces. Make sure you're valuing yourself correctly. There's a whole follow-up to be had on how do you compare your value to the rest of the market space. That's a whole different beast. We also covered the customer card and some basics just to cover at least understanding the structure of things, how to look at the templates of it. If you didn't see last week, it was all about inventory and the item card, so lots of content there. And we finally got back to our Visual Studio Code environment with talking about the basics of page markup language. So with that said, I hope everyone has a good day wherever you are or whenever you're listening to this. We do post these all on the SpareBrain YouTube. It would help us out a bunch if you made sure to subscribe to that. We're close to the 100 mark, so we can get a nice URL, and that would be a lovely thing to do. If you don't follow me on Twitter, we'll be doing lots of news in the next 60 days as well about new things that are coming. So make sure you pay close attention, I guess. And with that, I will see you all later. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.